move on, Keith, to talk about Newcastle. Now, their owners have injected £37 million into the club in the form of a new share issue. So the question is that most fans have been asking, could that potentially go towards a new or at least improved summer transfer budget for them?
Well, it's an interesting number, isn't it? 37. I mean, it doesn't seem, it's not like 40, 45 or 50. It's 37. It's a very specific number. And that was for one share. Also, I believe they issued another share last August, I think was for 60. So that's about 97 million put into the club, which is to be applauded. It's fantastic, and it's the right way to do it. And I've always thought that since the new group came into Newcastle, they've run the club extremely well. It does help, obviously, with any PSR claims for this coming season, or at the end of this season when they're seen and heard next year. And yes, I think it will give them some sort of hopeful transfer window plus whatever they sell. So I think Newcastle are going to be okay, and I think they're taking prudent measures to move things forward in the right way. So I think Newcastle, I don't think are going to hit the headlines for this sort of problem.
Mm-hmm. And with the amount of injuries this season, Keith, that they've suffered under Eddie Howe, do they need major investment, do you think? I know, as you kind of said, this number is quite peculiar, really, in terms of its stature. But actually, do you think that will go towards sort of rejuvenating the squad for the next year?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some ins and outs. But I think, injuries do come back, and we always used to say in football, of course, we've all heard it, that when you get an injured player come back, it's like a new signing. Well, in this case, I think Newcastle have got some real quality in depth that will come back from injuries. And so when you start looking at that and you look at the squad depth and go through each position, there may be just a couple of key areas that need to strengthen. And so overall, I don't think it's going to be too bad. I mean, I think Eddie Howe has done a great job, and I think Newcastle can go forward, I think, next season with a renewed strength and with a very good, deep squad.
I mean, Keith, there's obviously been some claim about him sort of, calling to be sacked because he's not at the level, say, that some fans are viewing him to be, that, they should be taking the next step in ownership, at least, or management. Do you think actually that's a bit premature, given, say, the result against Spurs at the weekend and how well they've played in specific games, that actually he needs to be given more time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's ridiculous to be calling for his head. I think he's done a superb job. And, you saw, as you mentioned, the game against Spurs, Newcastle played superbly. And they have been injury hit. There's no doubt about it. So, no, I think Eddie Howe is doing a great job. And I think anybody calling for his head seems to have a very, very short memory of where they were, a club in turmoil just a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I mean, Keith, one thing that's been raised too about Premier League clubs now agreeing the new cost control rules, so that 85% of revenues to be spent on transfer fees and wages. Is that good news for Newcastle as a club going forwards?
Well, I think it should be. Again, it'll depend off the pitch how they actually get more money in. I noticed they're opening a new fan zone. I think it's very soon called the Stack, which is right outside St James's Park. It's claimed to be a 3,000 person venue, and it's going to be open all week. Now, that's a great new revenue stream if it really takes off and is done well, which I'm sure it will be. Then you start to put those sort of new revenue streams. If they can, and I've always said, if they can expand their sponsorships at fair market values, which is a key phrase, and bring in some of the companies that the PIF have access to, then the future is very bright for Newcastle. They can do it all within the rules. So again, they've got a great chance to go on.
Talking of the rules, Keith, do you actually think that could potentially push the owners to build a brand new stadium? And I know you've mentioned there that it's being built outside St James's Park, but is there still, do you think, some feeling around the club that actually looking elsewhere to build a stadium would boost revenue?
It would be difficult, I think. They've had a good look at it from what I understand since they've been with the club. I think they've rejected the idea right now. Certainly putting things like this new fan zone in place would tend to indicate they've decided it's going to be a much longer term project than anything. I think the location in the city centre is fantastic, and I think it would detract from Newcastle if they had an out of town stadium. So I think they're best to stay at St James's, do whatever they can to improve the stadium, possibly. I know there's been some plans about increasing, a few thousand seats in there, etc., and getting it all cohesive in terms of different stands. But I think St James is one of the great stadiums, and I hope that they can modernise it and make it work financially.
I mean, at the moment, Keith, we know they're definitely one of the biggest clubs in England, no question. But globally, do you think they could actually become one of the superpowers if they are able to spend, if some of those rules do change? Could we see Newcastle becoming the next, say, Manchester City over the next 5 to 10 years, potentially?
Yeah, I think there is a chance for that. I think Newcastle's one of those clubs with the history, the legacy, the personality, the character of the Northeast, etc., that really could do well. And I'm sure there's a diaspora of Geordies all around the world that will act as custodians and ambassadors for them everywhere to try and generate more support. I think they could do. I think a lot of the international fans are very curious about Newcastle and what they're doing now with the new ownership. And if Eddie Howe gets the right squad for next year, then they could be back in the Champions League, hopefully, and that will definitely do it. And there's no doubt they could be up there challenging.